Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Monday, the first day of December, 2025. And as we begin a new week and a new month, we have stories, as usual, that continue to set the stage for the fulfillment of the predictions from the Bible of what's going to take place in the last days of this present age before the return of Jesus Christ. Now, today, this includes the predicament Israel finds itself in, as well as the blockbuster announcement by Prime Minister Netanyahu that he wants to be pardoned by Israeli President Herzog. So let's look at these stories and see how they all fit in. All right, first of all, from Israel HaYom. Israel fears U.S.-driven timeline in Gaza as terrorists emerge starving from the Rafah tunnels. This is a huge story. We'll begin with it. And then from the Times of Israel, Netanyahu requests presidential pardon in corruption trial, doesn't admit guilt. This is a huge story, a huge blockbuster here. And then to follow up on that from the Jerusalem Post, Netanyahu said he's not going to step away from Israeli politics for a plea deal. He intends to run for office again. Then finally, from the Times of Israel, once more, a former Netanyahu lawyer says the president can't pardon the prime minister without the admission of guilt, which Netanyahu will not do. So that's where we're at right now. It's a huge, huge story. It's obviously going to be an ongoing one. It'll be in the background for Lord knows how long, at least a couple of months. But we'll set the stage for it today for you and put everything into perspective. Now, where all these stories are going to lead, again, is anyone's guess. Like we say, we just don't know from day in, day out what's going to take place. Now, also, we're very excited about the new series we will be posting soon, Timeless Truths from the Bible. Our goal is to post them each day a few hours after we post breaking news first thing in the morning, usually between 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. here in the Pacific time zone. The first four episodes we're going to post will be three biblical examples of the Lord working his supernatural plan merely through natural means. And then the fourth historical illustration that confirms he still works this way, in our present day and age should boggle your mind. Bottom line is we want you to take away from these four different stories that we're going to give to you, three from the Bible and one historical story, that God is still working today. He's working his supernatural plan, but many times through natural means, not without miracles, without, something suspending the laws of nature, but still working supernaturally through the natural. And that's something we're going to get across to you in not only three biblical accounts, but a modern day one that will literally blow your mind. So it should be very eye-opening when we look at all these in context. All right, as for now, let's get back to the headlines. Headline number one. Israel fears U.S.-driven timeline in Gaza as terrorists emerge starving from Rafah tunnels. This is from Israel HaYom. With two deceased hostages remaining, the sides are moving closer to the beginning of the second phase of the Trump plan. In Israel's defense establishment, officials are worried about what they call American eagerness, saying that only Israel can dismantle Hamas. The day is not far off when Hamas either returns the last of the two deceased hostages to Israel or announces that it has done everything it can but is unable to locate them despite all of its efforts. When that happens, the agreement brokered by the U.S. stipulates that the sides are supposed to move into phase two. Now, under that phase, Israel is expected to gradually withdraw from the Gaza Strip in several stages while maintaining a perimeter presence. Reconstruction of Gaza would begin, and in parallel and in line with Israel's demand, a process to demilitarize the Strip would start, with an international force deployed in its place. Here's the however. But despite Washington's good intentions and despite Donald Trump's extensive plans for post-war Gaza, at this stage, not a single country has agreed to send troops to the Strip as part of the multinational force of the U.S. that the U.S. hopes to establish. That force is supposed, in the American view, to dismantle Hamas and create an alternative to its rule. Now, Turkey, of course, has volunteered its soldiers. That's the last country Israel wants there in Gaza, because Turkey is basically working hand in glove with Hamas, and that would be putting like a Hamas army in Gaza, just replacing the present one with a more modern one from another country. In fact, a member of NATO, too, of all things. Anyway, for now, the position within Israel's defense establishment is withdrawal only in exchange for demilitarization. In other words, they're going to have to be demilitarized first before thinking of withdrawal. It remains unclear, and here is the problem, whether the Americans will ultimately accept that demand. This raises the question of what Israel will do and whether it will stand firm or once again bow to American pressure. It's a worrisome proposition here. In the meantime, U.S. officials are supposed to oversee the process through the American Command Center operating Kiryat Gat, known as the CMCC. Yet anyone reading the announcement released by U.S. Central Command, marking 1 month since the center began operating in its current form, would have noticed that nearly all the achievements listed focused on humanitarian activity, not on advancing any of the additional processes the center is supposed to promote. In other words, they're there for other things and nothing is happening. According to the American plan, Gaza is now divided into two zones. The red zone is where the Hamas terrorist organization remains entrenched, described as Old Gaza, west of the so-called Yellow Line. The green zone is the area of New Gaza, under the Israeli defense control, located east of that line. Washington is trying to begin reconstruction efforts in the green zone, starting with the area of Rafah. Senior Israeli defense officials say that for now, Israel's interest is to allow Americans to pursue the processes they want to advance in return for these two deceased hostages. A senior security source said, "We are free as we need to be right now. We currently control the territory, we thwart attacks, we eliminate threats, and gradually force the terrorists to surrender. The Americans are leading a broad international process. You could argue they are naive, but we will help them anyway. This gives us legitimacy and time to rebuild the Army and restore its readiness, which is essential for both conscript and reserve forces." Another senior security official said that the only party capable of dismantling Hamas is Israel. As we've mentioned this over and over again. No one is going to do it for us, and no one is going to dismantle Hezbollah, as no one's going to dismantle Hezbollah's weapons arsenal on our behalf. In other words, you've got it not only in their southern border in Gaza, their northern in Lebanon. But we allow the Americans to try, and we assist them as much as possible. If, as is likely, they will fail to achieve this at some point, we will have no choice but to do it ourselves. That is what's coming up. The question is, will America allow it? Will there be pressure from the U.S. and the rest of the world for Israel not to do it militarily? That's the big problem that's going on. So anyway, the assessment is that it will not be long until the remaining terrorists underground in Rafah, there are a few of them, meet their end either by starvation or attempting to surface in search of food, at which point they'll be captured or killed. In the meantime, the IDF is operating patiently in the area with the goal of exhausting the terrorists without placing Israeli forces at unnecessary risk. So this basically sums up the current predicament Israel finds itself in. As to what will happen next, as well as when it will happen, we just don't know. It is unknown. But we do know from Scripture what will eventually happen, as we document in two of our books, 25 Signs from Near the End and Look Up, a Timeline of 50 Last Days Events. They're both free downloads from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy. If you haven't taken the opportunity yet to download them, please do. They're free. Everything we have here is free. It's no charge, no obligation. So please take advantage of it because it explains in great detail what's going to take place. All right. Headline number 2. And here's the bombshell that happened yesterday. Netanyahu requests presidential pardon in corruption trial. He doesn't admit guilt. This from the Times of Israel. President Herzog says he'll weigh extraordinary request based on expert opinions. His allies hail the move. The opposition slams attempt to evade responsibility. For example, Yair Lapid says he needs to express remorse and quit public life. That's from his enemies. 6 years after he was indicted on charges of fraud, bribery, and breach of trust, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu submitted a formal pardon request to Prime Minister Isaac Herzog yesterday, Sunday, seeking an end to his long-running and unprecedented corruption trial. Netanyahu did not admit guilt and in a video statement continued to contest the charges against him and the legitimacy of the process by which he was indicted. He also did not indicate any readiness to step down as prime minister, arguing that if he were pardoned, he would be free to move more effectively to advance Israel's interest. He further argued that the trial was tearing Israel apart and that its immediate conclusion would greatly help lower the flames and promote broad reconciliation. In other words, let's call it a day and move forward. The formal documents released in full by Herzog's office, get this, included a 111-page request from Netanyahu's lawyer Amit Haddad and a letter signed by Netanyahu. According to Herzog's office, Haddad submitted the request to the president's residence legal department. The request marks a new phase in Netanyahu's legal battle, which has stretched across years of shifting electoral fortunes, political turmoil, pandemic, wars, and protests. For the entire time since the indictment and after the trial began in 2020, 5 years ago, almost going on six, Netanyahu's opponents have called on him to step down over the charges. Netanyahu, throughout the years, has declared his innocence time and time again, and decried the trial as a political motivated witch hunt. All right. In the request, the lawyer Haddad says basically the Israeli president has the power to pardon offenders and modify sentences by reducing or commuting them. No law requires an admission of guilt as a condition for a pardon, but also that the Attorney General's office has long directed the handling pardon requests before a conviction should occur. Only in rare cases they pardon someone without a conviction or without declaring guilt. Again, in the request, Sadat cited Netanyahu's numerous duties as prime minister and claimed a pardon would heal the societal divisions caused in part by the trial and its ripple effects. Now, this indeed, as you can imagine, is a blockbuster story, and it'll take some time to play out. But we have this next story that further complicates the matters from the Jerusalem Post. Headline number 3. Netanyahu will not step away from Israeli politics for plea deal. He intends to run again for prime minister. Sources close to Netanyahu said he would not consider a deal that would require him to pull out of the political arena. He's planning to run again in the next elections. This touches the core of the debate over the trial and over a plea bargain over the years. Moral turpitude, the principle that would distance Netanyahu from politics. That's what he's accused of, by the way. Effectively, what the sources are saying is that with the ball in Herzog's court, the true win remaining in politics may be all but guaranteed. Sources close to Herzog said the decision will take at least 2 months. His office said Herzog's going to consider the request responsibly and sincerely once all legal materials are before him. It also stressed the unusual nature of this submission as it carries significant implications. Well, that's the understatement, isn't it? Again, the entire situation is fluid. It'll be in the headlines for some times. But then we have this story, which is really fascinating. Our last one, headline number 4. One of Netanyahu's former lawyers says the president can't pardon the prime minister without an admission of guilt. This is from the Times of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu's former defense attorney said the presidential pardon request that Netanyahu submitted yesterday on Sunday could not be granted before the premier admitted guilt in his corruption trial. A pardon is given to an offender. That's what the law stipulates. Micah Fettman said in an interview with Channel 12 Israel. Basic law, the president stipulates that the president of the state has the power to pardon offenders and modify sentences, reducing or commuting them. Fettman's comments came after anti-Netanyahu protesters rallied outside President Isaac Herzog's home in Tel Aviv, demanding he reject Netanyahu's pardon request. Herzog, for his part, said he was seeking legal opinion on the pardon request before discussing it and denied reports that he was currently leading towards conditionally granting the request or proposing a plea bargain provided Netanyahu admits guilt and possibly also leaves politics. So this is the mess right now Israel finds itself in, as if they don't have enough problems. Briefly summarize the bombshell announcement of yesterday of Netanyahu and its aftermath. As we mentioned, it's going to be an ongoing story in the background mixed with everything else Israel faces, like we said in the first story, worried about the Americans pressing them to give in on some of the red lines that they've determined. In other words, the disarmament of Hamas and Gaza before building can again take place. All right, the time is unknown. All this is going to happen. But like we emphasize, God has revealed to us in his word what will eventually happen to Israel and to our world. And that's what we have in the future. That's what we keep our eyes on, the eventual outcome, which scripture lets us know what's going to take place. In the meantime, we'll just have to take it a day at a time. I'm Don Stewart. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.